that image that came out of it, while it made me feel like it punched me in the gut, what it did was it brought thousands and thousands and thousands of comments that said, oh my gosh, there's a woman out there with a body like mine. I found out for the first time that there was other people who looked like me too. And I slowly turned the corner into being really honest about my body.
Sarah Nicole Landry, welcome to the Motherly Podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. What a great way to kind of start the day, kick this off, and really get into the goods of it all. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, you have gone through many transformations in your life, your body, your career, your family, your marriage.
Yeah.
I'm curious at the start, how do you think motherhood in particular has transformed you? And do you look at that differently, having children a decade ago and that transformation versus the transformation you've recently gone through with the birth of your fourth baby?
Any entry into motherhood is such a jarring experience. It's truly an identity crisis. But I feel like for myself, and especially being somebody who really didn't find herself yet, I had no idea who I was married at a very young age. I got married at 18, I got married at 19, but engaged at 18. And I was pregnant at 20 and had a baby by 21. So when you're kind of already seeking who you are, what's your purpose, and then you have this little being, it's very easy to zone in on, this is it. This is my entire purpose, is this being. And that's such a beautiful sentiment, and also a really sad one, because if a mother is not more than a mother, then who is she? And I really had to grapple with, as time went on, and 3 kids, and now I'm 25 with 3 children, I'm a stay-at-home mother, and this inkling, this pressure, like inside my body, just being like, I think there's more to you than this. I think that there's something else. And I think that you're a human being who happens to also be a mother. That's a facet of you. It's not all of you. And that's like a turmoil that I kind of went through. So then I went through this massive discovery of like, who the heck I even am, which a lot of it came through going to therapy, which God bless. And then my therapist being like, Sarah, you're a bit of a sponge. And she said it in such a kind, loving way, but she's like, you have 0 opinions of your own. You literally sponge everybody else's thoughts and you just make them your own. So I went on this bit of a, woo-woo self-discovery in a way of just, what if I just paid attention to what my thoughts were? And what if I just started writing them down? And that essentially became my Instagram over the years, is this very realistic journal of a lot of inside thoughts that I didn't realize other people were having the same ones. And we are so interconnected. But going through that whole thing, and then, establishing my career, really having a lot take off. I'm in a new marriage. My kids and I, we've settled in such a great place. We are financially stable for the first time in my entire life. And then we have a baby. And it was like, what I wasn't ready for and what I didn't see coming was, first of all, the pregnancy was very, very difficult. I had my first episode of a perinatal mental health struggle. I had never identified with one before that I knew of. And then having a baby and being like, okay, now you found who you are. You have this amazing career. You're a wife, you're a mother, you have all this stuff going on. Let's put a baby into the mix. And the trauma that came out was a lot to handle, because it wasn't like trauma, like being a mother was trauma. It was like standing at the kitchen sink being like, I've lost my purpose again. I'm back in this zone of, there's nothing more to me than this world in front of me, and feeling like I was being robbed of it, and feeling like a lot of resentment for people around me. The fact that my husband could just not have his boob out for a baby, or the fact that my kids could just walk out the front. I was just so like, what? How is this happening to me? And everyone's being so supportive, but I just felt a lot of turmoil. I had to really go back. I really had to go back into who I was at 20 and 21 and relive those feelings and really release them and work through them and find new safety and comfort in the duality of it, of knowing that you can be a mother and have a career. You can be a mother and be a wife. You can have a family with teenagers and a baby. And it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be what is your story. And it's never been linear. You've never been linear. Ride the wave and let's go. And it's a lot of that now.
That's a lot. to
That's
go through. But you
never ask me for
summarize.
an elevator pitch. I can't do them.
You've lived many chapters already and many
Yeah.
transformations. And I think I'm surprised to hear how much of a transformation you had with this most recent baby.
Yeah.
I wonder, what do you think it was that was unexpected this time, even after all the healing work you'd done? Because frankly, I find it kind of comforting knowing that you too were also rocked by
Mm.
a pregnancy, even after having done all that work. Because, we can feel healed, but every new chapter can bring new things out in us. Do you see it that way?
Yes, but I also think it can bring out your old chapters that you didn't quite heal. And
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes when you've moved past, what it's like to have a newborn, it's very hard to remember what it's like to have a newborn. And when you've moved past, traumatic instances in your life, there will be new things that remind you and they transport you back. Just
Mm.
yesterday, for the first time, my daughter, after, she had eaten food, she's 8 months old, instead of me wiping her down with a cloth, I brought her over to the sink and I leaned her forward and I washed her hands. And I kid you not, it was like I was transported back in time and I could feel everything. I could feel where I was. And it was just almost like, it sounds lovely. It was scary because I was like, no, 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 no. I've done so much work. I've come so far. Like I just got transported back and I had to like bring myself back into the reality and that I'm in a really good place. Like these are, I'm not going to fall down these like slippery slopes again. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
fall on motherhood again just because of having a baby again. And I think that's the big thing is like when you fell on the sword for motherhood and for everything, especially like trying to hold a marriage together when it wasn't going well, and just being like, if I can just stick with it for as long as I can for the kids. And like essentially falling on the sword, forgetting that there's blood everywhere. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
keeping anybody safe. This is actually a bad experience for all of us now. And I'm slipping slowly, that knife, it digs deep, right? It slowly, you're bleeding out essentially, if we're going to use that analogy. So when you've moved past that chapter and you're like, okay, I'm in a better place, I'm in a better marriage, I'm in a much better situation, and you have another baby, there is that like distrust you almost have for yourself. Like, am I going to do it again? Am I going to fall on the sword again? Am I going to start bleeding out? Because you remember it all so well. Even my kids, my son, one day I was wearing something that I guess reminded him of who I was before. And he has this dual thinking of me. He said I looked like old mom. And I was like, what does that even mean? And he's like, you look like mom before and I don't like it. Can you change your clothes? And I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, mom then was really sad. I don't want mom then. I want mom now. This was a few years ago before we
Mm-hmm.
even had another baby, but just goes to show that as you kind of move and heal through chapters, there is a lot that can kind of bring you back through things. And it isn't necessarily motherhood. It could be through jobs. It can be through relationships, when you've, had something end really difficult in a really difficult way. And then you find love again, that trust that you have to rebuild. But for this, it's like you're rebuilding it with yourself, which is such a interesting place to be, to have like a lack of trust of like, how are you going to do this? Are you going to be okay? And that feeling of you kind of got to grip and control the whole thing, which is impossible.
Mm-hmm. Are there other tools that you're able to use now when you feel yourself
I
going
would,
back mentally, whether it's access to a therapist or other self-care practices that you're prioritizing?
I think it comes from a lot of honesty and, therapy is there. It's accessible for me now, which is amazing. And thankfully I did a lot of the work during the pregnancy because that was a time where it was truly disabling for me. I wasn't able to function in any sort of way.
Mm.
And so through the birth, I really felt alive again. I was like, oh my gosh, like I came through this. I'm not struggling with depression at all. I felt so much joy and happiness and relief. So as things kind of creep up as you go, because there is that surge of joy and hormones and everything that comes with the baby. And then the reality when it hits you like a few weeks in or even a few months in for so many people where it's like, oh my gosh, everyone else is just moving forward with life. And I'm here trying to manage all of this. It took me 4 months before I genuinely asked for help. But that took me being really honest of, I thought that I could do all of this and I actually can't. And that's okay. Like it is okay. I just did this demonstration in my living room the other day because I was asking a question to my audience and, for them to ask me and my husband a question, and everyone was like, how do you balance it? How do you balance it? How do you balance it? And I'm like, y'all, we are only so big. So I brought all these house plants out and I put them down and I'm like, here, you already are pouring into your job, your house, your kids, your marriage, your relationships, your friendships, whatever. When you add something into that equation, you don't automatically become a bigger watering can. You don't become more, you don't have more, you give a little bit less to everything. That is the best you do. And it's never going to be perfect. So I think for me, it's been just like talking myself, being really honest through it and being like, you know what, I had to ask for help. And I felt a little bit of shame about that. And I'm really struggling with this. And I felt a little bit of shame about that. I had to have sleep help and I feel a little bit ashamed about that, and really acknowledging that shame instead of letting it sit within my body. And I think that that's making a huge difference.
I'm so happy to hear that. But I'm also happy that you are such an honest person and you have built a massive online community. I think because you are willing to be honest about what motherhood feels like, what motherhood looks like, the great stuff, the beautiful stuff, and the absurd stuff that, we'd probably rather not go through, but we do. And you have become, I really feel, a voice for a generation of mothers accepting and loving their bodies, or at least trying to get there. Among the things you're doing, you're hosting BodCon 2022. So I guess, we kind of dived right in, but for those who are less familiar with who you are and your journey, can you talk a little bit about how you became an influential voice in this space of sort of radical honesty about motherhood and embodying this body that we do?
It blows my mind all the time. Right now, it makes a little bit more sense. If people came on and they're like, oh, you're talking about like postpartum and marriage and like everything. And I'm like, yeah, go back like 3 years ago when I was like 8 years postpartum and still in it, because I faced my, quote unquote crap like years after it happened. So I was originally a mommy blogger, a craft blog 13 years ago, and was just I was very lonely in motherhood. I'll be honest. That's exactly why I did it. It's exactly why I started. I was living far away from my family. And I remember the first day I found a blog, and it was like the first day in being a stay-at-home mom that I was like, oh my gosh, there's other people that are also doing this, and they're making crafts and they're having fun and they're decorating their houses. When you live within four walls all day long with children, it felt so nice to read other people's words and have this community. So I was like obsessed with it. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And I Googled how to code my own blog. I got real gritty with it. It was the worst blog ever, but I kept at it. And I had no money for anything. And I realized that now. So it was like really choppy when you put it all together. And that was okay, because I was learning so much about what it is to write and what it is to create and what it is to connect and have community. And then that became, when Instagram came out, it stopped being such a focus on like our homes and our front porches. I mean, there was still that, but it was a lot about what we were eating and what we looked like. The camera kind of went lens out to lens in. The selfie became huge. And I just remember feeling so insecure and craving this community so deeply. And I went down this, I was now like third time postpartum. I was 225 pounds, which I don't say negatively anymore. I was at a much larger body size, and I was like, okay, this is it. I'm going to lose the weight. I'm going to have the community that I want. I'm going to, do all these things. I never would have said that out loud, but like reality was, why did I want to lose weight? Is I wanted people to like me. And that was a clear way to do that. But as I became a weight loss account. Everyone was they followed me for like how to lose weight after having children and how to lose weight with kids at home and how to do all these things. I was eating what a toddler should eat. And it landed me in really disordered eating. I went privately through a divorce, and my body lost even more weight, which into a dangerous level. And people were like, never looked better. Like, it was a lot of validation to be thin. And like, that was the greatest thing I could accomplish. And there was just so much more to me. And especially going through a divorce and realizing how much more to me there was and how much I was going through. And all anybody saw me for was, oh my gosh, you're thin now. This is so exciting for you. And I'm like, my whole life is in crumbles, but thanks. Like, it was so bizarre. And I don't ridicule or criticize anybody who gives those types of comments, because it's so ingrained in us that that's a good, successful thing. And we should be congratulating people for it. So a few years into the weight loss account, I started finding people who were sharing other things, and I started wanting to share it too. And there was nobody I really knew at the time who was sharing the stuff that I was struggling with, which was loose skin on my stomach and stretch marks. And I very, very timidly shared some very small moments of it. It was very curated, like very curated. And I remember the owner of Nick's, Joe, slid into my DMs and asked me to model for them. And I said no, because that was scary. I couldn't edit the photo. I couldn't alter it to the way I needed it to. I couldn't prove or be sure that I was going to look at my thinnest. So I said no. And she said, we're not doing it without you. So I showed up, and that image that came out of it, while it made me feel like it punched me in the gut, what it did was it brought thousands and thousands and thousands of comments that said, oh my gosh, there's a woman out there with a body like mine. And that was the first time I knew. That was the first time I found out for the first time that there was other people who looked like me too, for a long time. And for that, at that point, 8 years postpartum, I was still in my postpartum. I was still grieving fully and feeling so much shame. Didn't matter how much weight I lost. It was always like pressure to get a surgery and pressure to fix it. And I was just drowning in the emotions of it. So I started, also at the therapy at the same time, being like, write your feelings and all this stuff. And I slowly turned the corner into being really honest about my body, being really honest about, that I did have disordered eating, and that I was struggling to feel safe in relationships when it came to feeling accepted at different sizes. And, then I began dating and, eventually became married, and then got pregnant, and just decided that no matter what my body would look like, and no matter how much it changed, that I would never deny myself living again, because even at my thinnest, I was the most anxious and the most scared to leave the house and do anything. So I just promised myself, no matter the size, I will continue to show up, and I will be honest about this, which is why, even though people follow me for like positivity around postpartum bodies, the reality is I will probably say I'm grieving first, and that's okay. And these marks are absolutely normal and expected, and a beautiful thing that our skin can do. But I'm still going to grieve this process so that I actually come out the other side in a much healthier way. And I'm not stuck in this rut for 8 years like I was last time.
Can you talk about the difference between body positivity and body neutrality, self-love? I think maybe people haven't heard about the difference. They might have heard about body positivity, but I think, I know that even learning that body neutrality was a concept liberated me as, like you, a 4-time postpartum mother whose body will never be what it was before I had a child. And it has helped me personally come to a much deeper place of acceptance. So for those who are not familiar, what is body positivity? What is body neutrality? And kind of where are you on that spectrum?
So this is a really cool time for me to kind of bring up the roots of body positivity, because it actually is rooted in for plus size, fat, disabled, especially BIPOC bodies, and the most marginalized. Because we can talk about, body differences and stretch marks. The reality is I can still put on any clothes, walk out to the world, be able to sit on airplanes normally, be able to shop pretty much wherever I want, because I wear a size 12 and size 12 is available to me. it is not the same for those who are existing in larger bodies who can't shop where they need to shop. They can't sit on airplanes normally. The whole world is molded against them. And on top of that, they can't even get doctors to listen to them properly. So it is a health crisis for them. It is so much more. So body positivity as a whole, and why I don't label myself within that, is actually because it's an activist movement meant for those who are not me. It is not a good idea for somebody who is still straight sized and white to be centering themselves in that. And that is something I've definitely learned. However, I also didn't love the term positivity, even though I felt it and it was almost like I wanted it so bad that I'm like, yes, I love it. It's so great. Like I can love my body, but it was a very emotion driven thing. And I can't do that anymore. I can't be that person. Like if you're having a down day, you can't just have somebody be like, oh, just perk up, just smile, and then you'll
Right.
feel better. That's what we would call toxic positivity. So I can't do the same thing for my body, but what I can do is, maybe it's more coined self-love, because neutrality, I think, is a beautiful sentiment too, because I think it removes your body from being that most important part of you. It allows you to move through the world, deprioritizing what your body is. And it allows you to kind of sit between, I don't love it, but I don't hate it. We're just here. But for me, it's a lot of showing up. And what is love? Like when we think of every other relationship in our world and what love is, let's take mothering, for instance. You don't always like it. You don't always like them because they can be a lot sometimes, but you always love them. The love is consistent, but the love is feeling, yes, but it is more action. It is how you show up for each other. If you take your partner, when the last time you had butterflies in your stomach for them, it may not be every single day, but yet you wake up and you choose love for them. And so I had to really remove what self-love was. I had to shift it in my head and be like, it's not about the feeling, it's about how you show up. If I choose to show up for myself, where would I want to wear? Be honest about my emotions around it all, grieve properly, and allow myself all the space for everything. That is also love. And it doesn't mean that it's always positive, but it does mean that maybe you end up in a more positive space. And at the end of the day, maybe don't think about your body so much, because I think that we're plagued as women, and targeted as women, especially, to think so much about our bodies to the point that it takes over almost every, when I think about people like Steve Jobs, who just put on the same pair of jeans and black shirt, and I'm like, it makes sense though, because it was something he didn't have to decide. Now make it a woman and be like, you've got to not look too much this, you got to not look too much that, but you got to make sure you look at least a little bit of this. And we balance between, does this look okay? Does this fit okay? Does this, that? Is it going to pinch my stomach when I sit down? Can I nurse in it? Can I do this with it? We have so many thoughts around our bodies all day long, and the projections of how we're going to be received in the world. And so the more we can kind of accept that, yeah, I do love to do my hair and wear a tight black dress sometimes, but also that's a decision for me, not because I feel like I'm going to be more accepted into a room. And if I can get less distracted about my body, the better.
Yeah. I love that too. And as mothers, our bodies are built for change, and just we have to sort of flow with that, but we don't want to, right? Because
the ebb and the flow.
Right. Exactly.
It fascinates me that we get so stuck in that. It was actually my husband that said it to me the first time, because he was talking about his own journey of his body. And he was like, yeah, I like gain and lose 30 pounds at least once a year, but that's like how the body, it like ebbs and flows. And I looked at him and I was like, so you're just good with it, like changing and then like what? And he's like, well, you're never like going to be a set something. You are always changing. You are always in a moment of motion. You are not a still thing. And it took me back a little bit, because it felt like I was chasing my whole life a place of stillness, like getting to a point where I would like my body and then staying there. And to know that not only is that an impossibility, but not even like something that brings joy. Like I just can't even imagine. And then it kind of hits you that your entire life you've been taught to chase your 12-year-old body. Is just mind blowing. But that's like the low hanging fruit is us not liking ourselves in the mirror in the morning. As we kind of go up through the tree and the roots of it, you realize it's the things that your grandmother was taught, and the systems that conditioned her down to your mother, down to you, that kind of said your most important part is your body, and how you show up and how men accept you is going to be the key of your success or not. It goes back so far. And so it's kind of like learning it's okay to change, and that we are always in motion. There is no goal place, because it would last for the second it happened, and then you would move on.
I love your husband for saying
I
that
know.
and giving us that bit of wisdom. I wonder too, as someone who is raising daughters and that 12-year-old girl,
Yeah.
what do you have learned so much yourself. You have witnessed so many other women and others within your community talk about body acceptance, body positivity. So how do you model that and talk to your own daughters about what you've learned?
Well, a big thing is I try and not talk about my body. I try and talk about other things. And I've tried to learn to not talk about them in that way either. Like it's very easy to be like, oh, that looks so good on your body, or that you look so pretty today, or this or that. And changing the language I use around them, but also change the language I use for myself. But it's not to say it's not going to come. I mean, they're part of the world. They're part of social media. They're absorbing the same things, the same recycled messages that we've all had. So being really honest about it too, right? Like that does suck that people say that. And how can I like speak better into it? And how can I be like a better person? And one thing that I taught them years ago is don't ever let your weight define you, because the second that number comes into your mind, it can control you in ways you never knew. And so when we would go to doctor's appointments and stuff, I'd say it's up to you, but you can absolutely ask to face away from the scale. And what I find amazing is they've always asked to face away from the scale. So they are listening, they are learning. I think what's important here is that you have influence. I think as parents, you have influence on your children, but you cannot command their world. You cannot drive it. You cannot direct it. You're kind of just sitting in the front seat with a map of what you've gone through and potentially help them, guide them along the way. But they have to make these decisions for themselves. They have to kind of go through it in their own way. So you can't prevent the struggle. You just have to kind of remember that the very first language your children ever learns is yours. So what language are you using? How do you speak of yourself? And how do you show up in the world and in love for yourself that reminds your kids to do the same? And especially, I will say, around my son, because he will also need to, I don't think it's the burden that should be on the daughter's shoulder. I think it also has to be on the sons to be around women and to be raised around them, to know how to be supportive partners, how to be someone like my husband, who has to this day never commented on my body. And that frustrated me for so long. But 50 pounds in of weight gain since, a pregnancy and delivery and healing from disordered eating has been such a blessing to have constant love without this absence of, if I used to be complimented and now it's not there, It is very consistent. He's very matter of fact. When I had a moment after delivery and I stood in the mirror and was like, my stomach is so baggy, like it's just hanging there. And he's like, yeah, you had a whole kid in that. Like there's a whole thing in there. And then it came out of your body. And like, I don't know what you're getting at. And I was just like, okay, yeah, you're very right. But it kind of snaps you out, right? Like
Totally.
Very matter of fact. But yeah, like back to the kids, like I think it's just really important to pay attention to how you talk, especially around food, the goods and the bads, like, oh, I don't want to cheat. Like, oh, that's a bad thing to eat, or this. If you tell me something's bad, if you tell a kid to not touch a hot stove, they want to touch it just a little bit more. So you learn that with kids. If you tell them something's bad and remove them from existing around things like treats and sugar, they're only going to want it more. And I've learned that now, that they're like little tiny increments of existing around food without food shame. They don't try and like go after it a lot more anymore. So it's been fascinating. And I truly was on like a huge diet with them and then had to like learn my way out of it. And a huge part was my daughter looking at me and saying, all anybody likes you for is because you lost weight. And I was like, this is not how my kids will know me. This is not what I will be known for. And even if I thought I was hiding it from them, they're very aware of what's going on. And they think that's why I've been accepted in the world. So I got to do something and I got to change it right now. And so we did.
Wow. I want to talk a little bit about the business side and
Yeah.
the career that you have built. You mentioned how you started as what you called a mom blogger and
Mhm.
now have, iterated and grown and changed and are really one of the most influential people on the internet, which is incredible. Um, but I was thinking about, this term mommy blogger and even the term influencer. Um, you know, it seems to me that women get called influencers and men get called thought leaders.
Yeah.
I consider you, you can be any label you want to be, but certainly you are driving the thoughts around what it means to have a body and be human in the
Mhm.
internet age. How do you label yourself? What do you think is the definition of this career that you've built?
I've always struggled with this whenever I go to anywhere and people are like, what do you do? And I'm like, ah. And it was so easy when I was working at a company and I was working on an editorial team. And I'm like, I'm a writer, I'm
Right.
this, I'm that. And now I'm like, well, I'm a writer and I'm a podcaster. And, I work on social media, I do marketing. And I also, have a community thing that I do here. And, I'm a public speaker and I do keynotes and all of this stuff. And it's like, I can't find that word because you say influencer and it means it creates so much judgment and
Mm-hmm.
mistrust for people because they have it, it's like saying if you have Mother's Day, for instance, let's bring it, like, everyone has their own individual experience with a mom or being a
Right.
mom. So it's like, how do we have these labels and why are they so infant, like they're just made to be so small and so inferior. And you're right, we have like mom boss and girl boss, we
Yep.
cutesy it up, and then we have, like, I talked to my one friend, she said it took her like 4 years before she ever labeled herself as CEO for company. She had herself as like operations manager or something. I don't even remember what she said, but
Mm-hmm.
she was like, it took me so long to take that role and not just be applauded for being a mom
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur. She's like, nobody is calling men that. And
Exactly.
so it's so difficult because I truly, honestly have not
Mm.
found that word. Even if I were to say that I am I will to this day have people be like, what is it that you do? Like, what is your job? And I'm like, oh gosh, we have so far to go because it is even as simple as, let's say, a podcast, we're doing this podcast right now. Realistically, how much time do they actually take? And it takes about 5 to 6 hours, right? Like,
Yep.
realistically, it is a 1 hour thing, but it's about 5 to 6 hours of work. Take an Instagram story, for instance. It is what we see for all of 30 seconds. In reality, has probably been a 6 week process. It probably took about an hour and a half in total conception to
Mm-hmm.
reality. And then take an Instagram post, same sort of thing. Take an Instagram post that's just your own work, and it takes your entire lifetime of experience wording it, creating it. We have done what used to be tens of thousands of dollars of production costs in a magazine or on television, and we've brought it down to a single person and called it an influencer. Like, I can't get with it. I just can't. And I wish there was a better word. I sometimes I'll say content creator, but I feel like that
Mm.
still minimizes it
It
because I'm like,
does.
it's still not enough. So I tend to lead with words that I do find are more respected. If
Mm-hmm.
you say things like, oh, I'm a writer and a podcaster, that tends to be really welcomed. But I will say, unless people kind of go and they'll be like, oh, well, what's your handle? And they'll go and look at it. And suddenly there's a light that changes in them. And when they realize that you are not just kidding around or self-labeling, and
Right.
potentially maybe it's because it's a job that you don't actually apply and get accepted to, you don't really go to school for, it's just you do it or you don't. And so anybody can call themselves an influencer. And I remind myself and the kids of that all the time. I'm like, if you have one friend that you've ever made a suggestion to, you are an influencer. We
Mm.
all are. So it's weird to have this like common word be a career word when it's literally for everybody.
It is, but I will have to say, I plant my own flag. I don't think it's a coincidence that because it's about how many women and especially mothers have built digital careers
Yes.
that we lack this cultural word. And you're right, like you kind of need someone else to call you a thought leader, which I proudly will. You absolutely are a thought leader. But it is tricky. And another sort of dilemma within this space, and I'm wondering how you've
Yeah.
wrestled with that is around telling your deeply personal and
Mm,
family's stories versus
mhm,
keeping certain things private. You know, to
mhm.
some people, I'm sure what you do seems so glamorous and exciting and lucrative. And to other people, they're like, oh my God, I would never do that. I don't even
Yeah.
put pictures of my kids on the internet. So,
Yeah.
can you talk about that evolution for you of
Mhm.
blending that boundary, or where you've decided to build those boundaries around your personal self, your family, and your business?
Yeah, I mean, with anything that has to do with me, I get to be kind of like the be all and end all with it. If it's showing my stomach or stretch marks and wearing underwear on the internet, that seems to be my own decision, and I have the support of those around me. But I didn't really have to ask for it either. When
Mm-hmm.
it comes to family situations, like for instance, I've never shared why I got divorced. I never shared it. And because it's not just my story, it trickles into so many other people, especially three little people that I happen to love very, very much. It is not just my story, it is theirs too. And I don't think it is fair or right to tell it on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's fair and right for our entire family to have that out. So
Mm-hmm.
people will sometimes it bothers me that the most googled thing is like, who is her ex-husband? I'm like, just leave it. Like, to me, I'm like, it's so hard to but I understand at the same time that curiosity of it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you see my kids, and people often will bring up, you know that I don't show all of my kids all the time, or sometimes there's an emoji on their face. And
Mm-hmm.
that's because as time has gone on, and once they became, I mean, when they were little toddlers and I started, there wasn't really a lot of conversations around that. There wasn't really anything about consent. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I also grew up where my mom put my picture in the newspaper anytime she wanted. So I was like, this is totally fine and normal. And I was their consenting adult until they were of age to have an opinion. And then
Mm-hmm.
I started saying to them, if we're making money on something, or if I'm making money on something, that shouldn't be, I can't use you all to do this. So
Mm-hmm.
it wrestled for me. And I never felt that about other people. I never would see somebody's kid in an ad and be like, oh, but are they giving their kid a cut? It was a me thing. And so I just started being like, you guys have full consent
Mm-hmm.
over what you are in or what you are not.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if there's ever an opportunity that comes up for us that maybe involves you, you will first be asked before I ever accept it. You still have a chance to back out right at the moment of. You
Mm-hmm.
also will be paid your compensation for the work that you do. That includes pitching. If they are involved right from the ground floor, like, here's the campaign. What do you think of it? What do you think we should do? They pitch. If they don't want to be in the photo, but they want to take the photo, they're allowed. I've taught them DSLR.
Mm-hmm.
They are really great at getting involved in it. So it's become a little bit of like this family business in that regard. But that doesn't mean you're not going to see an emoji over some of their faces sometimes, because that's where their comfort level's at. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that does bring the baby into question. And I have been, asked about this a lot. But again, I'm her consenting adult until she is of age of consent, and anything that she's involved in. And to be honest with you, after my pregnancy and after feeling like I couldn't bond with a baby because I was so in depression when she was born, feeling that much joy and light come out of a singular person and through me, I don't think I could have helped but shared her. I just don't think, and I think it would have made it that I was doing things for other people, or so that people didn't think differently of me, when all I wanted to do was share her, and I wanted to share my joy, and I wanted to share this experience. And then I've seen other families who completely disguise their kids on social media all the way through. And I mean, I commend that as well. I think
Mm-hmm.
anytime in motherhood and parenting, you are faced with so many decisions where you have to execute on something. And there's always going to be somebody on the other side doing exactly opposite of that. And you have to come to your own conclusion of what feels right for you, or what at least feels the most right.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's been such a journey, but I will say, I was a little nervous sharing her, just because I felt like I hadn't really done any mommy stuff or really shared about motherhood in a really in this way, or through like a newborn, as much, that I was worried that my audience would be like, no, she's changed. Like, it's all different now. But I get so many messages from people every day that go, I don't know what it is, but I just love watching Lemmy in your stories. And I love, seeing when she lights up in the morning in her little outfits. And I'm really struggling with mental health. And something about seeing a baby in the light they have makes such a difference. And I have to think about this and go, is the answer to all of this erasing children? I don't know that that's the answer either. So I think it's just great that we're asking questions. I think it's great that we're considering consent. I think it's great that we're muddying things over, but I don't know that for me, the right answer is to erase children from the process of having conversation.
Yeah, I don't envy the situation that you're in and trying to find that balance, especially as your kids grow up. But for those listeners who don't know, Sarah Nicole has 2 million Instagram followers and among many others on other platforms. And so you've also gotten to be like a sounding board for, I think, like a generation of women and mothers and others. And I'm wondering, especially at this point in a pandemic, what are you hearing that mothers in particular are really struggling with these days? You've built this community around radical honesty.
Mm-hmm.
What are the really ongoing burdens that you hear about, and maybe ones that might be surprising to a listener to hear?
To be honest, I think the biggest challenge is when you have a child, how everyone will also feel like it is their child. Mm-hmm. That the response, when I was pregnant, I think people were like, worried when I was, struggling with depression, but more so worried about if the baby was going to be okay. Mm. There was definitely care. I don't want to like completely exclude it, but you do feel the shift about you when you become pregnant, that everyone cares about you a little bit more because you're carrying life. And so then when that life comes into the world and you make even the tiniest of different decisions or errors, I'll bring in the biggest example that really threw me was food, because babies now eat differently than they did 10 years ago. Not only did I have, the conversation come up about, baby-led weaning and purees and all this stuff, but there was I was shamed. Like people were like, what are you doing giving her purees? And I'm like, because I struggle with anxiety, and baby-led weaning is a very new term for me. I'm not there yet. I'd like to learn a little bit more, take a CPR course. And people, one person even was like, oh my God, LOL, you are so old school. You can tell you're an older mom. And I thought, you know what? F you. Is my kid fed? Is she happy? Are you checking in on my mental health? No, this is like this new, that's the one side of social media can be so moving and so beautiful and so transformative. It can also bring out this hierarchy of motherhood, right? And I saw somebody actually do a post comparing baby-led weaning to the new breastfed is best. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yes, there's such a hierarchy for motherhood. And when you're doing it online, everyone's there to kind of do, well, that's not what I would have done. Instead of like 10, 15 years ago, you just didn't do what everyone would have done. And you just did what you may have read in a magazine or what you Googled about online. There was a lot more winging it. And now it feels a lot more constructed and manipulated and controlled. So when you come into differences, it can be difficult. So I find myself often regurgitating and explaining like, this is my 4th baby, but this is my first time in this new arena of motherhood. And I think at the end of the day, we all already kind of feel like crap about how we're doing it. If we could just be a little bit more, gentle with each other, hold space for each other. It's okay that you don't parent the same way. It's okay that we do things differently. Can we, be friends? Like, can we kind of find this common ground? And I will say my core followers, like a lot of times these like criticisms or things that kind of come in where they're like, I don't like, or even coming back to the social media thing, I don't like seeing kids on social media, but they'll watch TV shows that have kid actors in them. So I'm like, you don't like them seeing them here, but you're okay watching them on a different type of screen. You'll read them in magazines, but you don't want to read about them. It's just such a fascinating thing where we kind of go down these holes with stuff. But I try and just kind of bring it all back home of like, we're human, y'all. Like we are human with human experiences and feelings and very different makeups, very different family structures. It baffles me that we have women struggling to feel guilt around whether they should go back to work or not, while there are other mothers who are working 2 jobs just to get food on their kids' tables. And we somehow have the audacity to feel like one mother is better than the other, or create hierarchies amongst ourselves. And this competitive spirit that we've done with our bodies, we've done it with work, we've done it with relationships, and we've done it with our children, where we really come into places where we feel really against each other. And I think that we would do so much better just holding so much space for each other and creating community with, understanding for each other, and really, just looking at it all a lot with, I just think, like, more open eyes. And I'm not perfect, but I'm very willing to be wrong. And I think that that's a huge difference for me is, as we've gone on, my baby actually now completely rejects puree, and she only wants baby led weaning. So she figured herself out.
Right.
And you know what? I wouldn't say that I was wrong though, but if there was an instance, I think you've got to be willing to be wrong in situations. Otherwise you're just like a stick in the mud. You're not going anywhere. So I'd rather just be willing to figure it out, willing to be wrong, and willing to be open about that.
If you look back on all the ways that you've evolved since becoming a mother, and the ways that your career has exploded and changed, I'm curious, if you reflect back on all those evolutions, all the healing, all the insights you've gained, is there a place when you look then to the future that you are hoping to get to, both with your career, but also just who you are and what you're trying to do with your family and your time on planet Earth? Where are you hoping to take all of this?
One thing, it brings me back 13 years. And like, I always kind of get choked up about this, but I remember being the woman in the living room who felt like she didn't have a soul to talk to, who felt so alone. And social media has given us this gift, but where do we take it? We can't live in this combative state. So what if we hold more space for each other? What if I can be someone who leads in that? So I feel like it's going to be a lot less about me as time goes on. I think I want to hold, and I think it's one beautiful thing about podcasts, but also going back into my roots. I really want to get back into really solid blogging, but not so much blogging, just having opportunity to talk with people and getting it down in a place where as you're doing it, people aren't interjecting their own thoughts with it, because I think we need so much more room for each other. And I want community at its core again. I think that's why, even if it's like the most mundane crap, I story my whole day, because I'm like, I know what it's like to be that nursing mom who's just trying to keep herself awake in the middle of the night, or has only done dishes and laundry all day, and nobody has checked in on her. If I can just be one person that just makes you feel like, it's okay, and life happens, and this is a season, and then it's not. I just want to do that. I just want to show up. I just want to keep showing up and not being so, there's a lot of goal oriented people. I'm not one of them. My whole life has surprised me, to be honest. So it's a very surprising thing. So I love being surprised by life. I love not really having expectations and just letting reality be reality and kind of moving through that. I will say though, I hope at some point that I create a bit more. I think I've been like, ever since I got divorced and I was working 2 jobs and living at my parents', I've been like spinning so many wheels. And I am ready, and I've started to hire and get more help and, create better systems so that I can at some point find myself moving slower, if that makes sense. But like I saw somebody the other day, they're like, the best thing you can do for your life is like take time in the morning, like go through it slowly. And I'm like, my baby is like screaming. The kids are knocking on the door. They're out of milk. I'm at the corner store. Now I'm going through a drive-through at Tim Hortons because I need a coffee, and I also need breakfast and lunch for the children. And then I have to get on a call that I'm probably going to be 5 minutes late for. I just want to get rid of the hurriedness about it at all. So personally, I do hope for a slowness. I just don't think it's in this season. So I'm not really going to feel bad about it right now.
I think a lot of mothers actually are looking for a slowness and intentionality. I've been reading so much about the burnout that mothers are going through within, this season of the pandemic. What do you want to say to the burned out, exhausted mother, maybe who's in a place that you've been at in the past, where she just doesn't recognize herself, because it's clear that we have an epidemic of burnout and of burden on mothers, and the pandemic has really just exacerbated it. I know you've been there
Yeah.
at various points, so I'm curious what you might want to say to them.
I will say, first and foremost, this last year and a half has proven to women what we always feared, that if we were equals with our partners and with men in general, and something like this were to happen, who would have to watch the children? And we saw it across the board, women losing their careers left, right, and center because somebody had to watch the children. Somebody had to teach the children, homeschool the children, or make decisions to put them in childcare or not. I couldn't help but think about the single mothers. And I'm like, how are you even faced with this? How are you going to work in a customer service job with a child who's homeschooling? It's been an impossible situation
Mhm.
that really faced women with the reality of we are not as far up and as equal as we thought we were. But then I will also say to the burnout and to all of that, I live a very minute by minute life. And it's been like that since I gave birth to
Mm.
my baby. And, there was maybe a little bit more slowness last year because I was so pregnant and so ill and it was forced upon me. But when you have a baby and your life becomes very minute to minute, it is
Mm.
like, how many minutes are the feeds? How many minutes since they last pooped? How long did they nap for? There is so much, like, you're minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, week to week. And you somehow have to find yourself in that chaos. And so for me, I just stopped feeling bad that I didn't have all this time. I'm like, even the idea of going and having a bubble bath, which I know is a huge thing we say for self-care, I'm like, with whose time and with whose body, because I cannot. So I just went very minute to minute with it. And I know it is going to be different for everyone. I think when you talk about love, you have to identify your own love languages and figure out what they are. For me, I have to start and end the day the exact same way. So I always wake up and I do a fresh face. I will, put skincare on. If I choose makeup, I put on makeup. It's like 5 minutes, it's like 10 minutes, but it's a moment where I'm face to face with myself, where my hands, I'm like, I heard somebody call it a face hug. You're in this moment with yourself. And I start the day that way and I end the day that way because I have to remind myself that I am a human being. And I found that the times I was slumped in all of it the most, when I look back, it was when I just gave up and I felt like I didn't even have the 5 minutes, that I didn't even try anymore. And so giving myself like that little reminder, like, yeah, we're in the weeds. We're in the weeds. We don't have the time to do like the big hair anymore.
Mhm.
We're not going to have a lot of time to do a lot of the things that we used to love, but this is where we are right now. How do we spend 5 minutes together? And I would say the same thing for my marriage. I would say the same thing for like all of my kids who are in, full-time school. You find a way, love finds a way. So if you give yourself an opportunity to find what that love language is for you and not feel so bad about not having the hours, but letting yourself have the minutes and letting go of the rest and allowing yourself to grieve through the process of this massive identity change, because it does feel like a bit of a crisis and it's a relearning of who you are.
I love all of that. I'm reading a book about mindfulness that talks about that exact topic of not wishing to be somewhere else and just accepting where you are. And through that process, it's the only freedom you can have, is just accepting where you are right now. At Motherly, we believe that motherhood brings out our superpowers. And I have an idea of what I think your superpowers are, and you get to share them with the rest of the world. But I'm curious for you, Sarah Nicole, what do you see as your superpowers?
I think I can make you laugh or I can make you cry, but I can't do a whole lot in the middle. It's one or it's the other. And I think I'm really good at figuring out my own human emotion and recognizing that there's a lot of other people that have those same emotions. And if they don't, they get to learn a little bit more about people with that do.
I completely agree. And we are all really just so grateful that you're willing to share a bit more about what it's like to be you, what it's like to be human, certainly what it's like to be a busy mother. And thank you so much for joining us today on the Motherly Podcast and starting your week with us.
Oh, it's honestly what a great way to start the week, especially in talking about mindfulness and intentionality. It's very easy on a Monday morning. I just did like 4 drop-offs for the kids and also had to pick up my husband's car. It was a very busy start to the day. And can you feel really, I came home and I was just like, what am I doing? Like, what is my week? What is my life? And to sit down and be like, yeah, what is my life? Like, what are we doing? I think is a great way to start the day. And without shame, just really honoring the season you're in and recognizing a lot of people have seasons where they can just pack their bags and go on a trip tomorrow and have, a week of self-care. And that's maybe not your now, it's maybe not your later, but we can live vicariously through those people while simultaneously enjoying where we are today as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Amen. And thank
Amen.
you again. Thanks for making time for us.